Okay, thank everybody for joining us for this last class on Mourning Is Rebuilding. And as I promised, we're going to talk more today about the actual day of Tisha B'Av and some of interesting tidbits, but important lessons from some of the ideas that we do on Tisha B'Av and some things from Eicha and some things from Kinnis. So please bear with us. We'll try to end about 9 o'clock, 8:45. Not going to keep you guys too long, but we're just going to sort of give an insight and a direction regarding Tisha B'Av. So I want to start off with a fascinating thing that I saw this year. I haven't seen this before. It could be you all are aware of this, but it's something that I've seen this year, and I always love it. And I mentioned this before. It's always important to remember that there's never a time that you can't learn more, right? I'm not very learned, but thank God I've been in yeshiva for many years, and there's always more to learn. There's so much to learn, right? It's mind-boggling, and therefore I like emphasizing and reminding myself that I saw this for the first time this year, and I want to share with you. There's actually a couple things that we're going to talk about are first timers for me. So please enjoy. And again, if you have questions or comments, feel free to make a comment on that or ask. So there's a fascinating concept. We spoke about the 3 weeks, and I know I said I'm going to talk about Tisha B'Av. This turns into Tisha B'Av. The 3 weeks. How many days are the 3 weeks? Starting from Shivas B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av is 22 days. Right? The 3 weeks is 22, including Shivas B'Tammuz and including Tisha B'Av is 22 days. Now, there's also 22 days. There's also 22 days from Rosh Hashanah until Shmini Atzeres. Now, I know it sounds like years away, right? But trust me, it's right around the corner. Right? There's 22 days from Rosh Hashanah until Shmini Atzeres. And I saw written down, I forgot who, I think it's the Klutzker, or one of the great Hasidic rabbis of pre-war Europe. He points out and says that we have to understand that there's a connection between these 22 days. Because the 22 days of mourning that we're in now, which climax with Tisha B'Av, which we'll talk about, right? And the 22 days of Rosh Hashanah until Shmini Atzeres, it's called Yimei Ahava, days of love, days of excitement, days of out there, right? We're on the contrary of the morning, we are like B'nai Malachim, we're children of kings, right? And we're greeting our Father, and we go out into Sukkah to remind ourselves that we're in the embrace of God and Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory. So seemingly these 2 days are polar opposites. Right? On one hand, we're mourning, right? We're in destruction, right? We're not shaving, we're sitting on the floor, right? Like we spoke about in the past weeks. And on the other one, we're high up, we're elevated, we're lofty. And he pointed out and said that this service of God, getting a relationship with God, is not defined in one way. And we have to remind ourselves and realize that the days of mourning that we're in now, it's not mourning that we're crying like we spoke about, right? It's not just like oy vey, and it is oy vey, but it's oy vey in a way of, okay, let's grow. It's an oy vey in a way of, let's get closer to God, right? That's what the oy vey is, because everything that we do, whatever the service of that time is, right? Right now, it's service of mourning. It's a way of getting closer to Hashem. The same way that the 22 days of Yimei Ratzon, Yimei Ava, right? The days of connection to God, days of love, right? The day that we're like on a higher level. All those, it's the same thing. It's service of God, and as I think it's a beautiful thing to reflect on and to think about, that we are serving God now in our mourning state, right? In our downtrodden state, but we're serving God. So that's one thing that I want to sort of start off today's class with, and this is important to remember, that Tisha B'Av is serving God. Yes, we're going to talk about you're not allowed to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av. We're going to talk about that a little bit, right? But this is the service. this is how we get closer to God. We get closer to God, and we have to do it with a smile. I think we spoke about this last week. I don't remember if we did or we didn't, right? But one of the great rabbis of pre-Europe was found smiling on Tisha B'Av. They asked him, "How can you smile on Tisha B'Av? It's a sad day." He said, "I have a hard time not smiling when I'm doing avodas Hashem, when I'm doing the service of Hashem." So you're right. I'm supposed to be I'm mourning, but I'm smiling. It seems like a contradiction. But I'm mourning and I'm smiling because now I'm doing avodas Hashem, I'm doing the service of Hashem. All right, so that's the same idea. We have to realize that Tisha B'Av is a form of service of Hashem. It's a way of connecting to Hashem through the mourning, and that's step number one that we have to realize as we're going into Tisha B'Av, the climax of this sad day. Number two, right? Number two is the idea, right? Excuse me. Right. Number two is that it's fascinating that that the kinos that we have now. We don't do all the kinos here in Yitzchayim, right? We picked certain ones, but there are 40 kinos for the daytime, and the nighttime we have 6, right? And the daytime we have 40 kinos that we say. 40 kinos that we say. What's this number 40? Why do we have 40 kinos? Right, I remember in the shul that I davened in Toronto, we said all 40 kinnas. We were there till chatzos, until really it was like there the whole time, right? The thing would take long by us. Right? We said all 40 kinnos. In yeshiva in Israel, in the shul that I davened in, we said all the kinnos. Right? So we don't say all of them. It's hard to say all of them, and you're not obligated to say all of them. Right? We pick some that are meaningful, and we try to change it around some years. Right? But why is there 40? So we spoke about this many times, but the number 40, and it's just again along the same lines, and I'm trying to impress this idea on us, right, and to myself. Right? The 40 represents the idea of transition. 40 represents the concept of changing directions. That's what 40 represents. We find Moshe was up in Shemaim for 40 days. The Jewish people were in the desert for 40 years. The flood was 40 days. A baby in a mother's stomach until 40 days, it's not considered a fetus. Doesn't have a gender yet. Once it's 40 days, and in halacha, it's considered a new level. And I'm not getting into that complicated laws of when is it a fetus, when it's not, and all those technical things, halacha, that fall into it. But we have this concept of 40 days. A mikveh has to be 40 sa, right? The measurement of 40 sa of water. And so we see this concept of 40 has to do with transition, of change. And we know from Rosh Chodesh Elul, which is not too far away, until Yom Kippur, it's also 40 days. Because 40, the numerical letter, the letter that's the numerical value of 40 is mem. And mem is the only letter that when you spell it out is the same thing. So to be able to transition mem, that's how you spell out mem. Other letters you spell it out, right, with other letters, right? But mem is the only one that you do mem. And to transition and to change, you have to be in tune with yourself. You have the inner part of yourself, the hidden part of the letter, the spelling out of the letter, and the external, the way we see it, have to be the same. And therefore, 40 represents the idea of change, the idea of transition to another state. And Tisha B'Av, it's teaching us, and the rabbis, when they created, again, it's over time that it's been made, because it wasn't made like this right away. Because some of the kinnos that we have are destruction of Europe and the burning of the Talmud, right? We'll get to that. But as it's developed, we see this 40 for us to reflect on, right? That Tisha B'Av is a day of change. Tisha B'Av is a day of changing ourselves, right? Of making ourselves into a new beginning, right? How's that? It's a day of mourning. So I want to tell you something beautiful. I want to tell you, right, something unbelievable, right, regarding this idea of change. And I'm going to start it off now. We'll put it on the side, and then we'll come back to it at the end. Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the year, my friends. We don't say Tachana. We don't say Tachanun. Tachanun, right? For those out there that are not sure what it is, it's a prayer that we say. It's like mourning. It's like asking God for forgiveness, and we don't say Tachanun on a holiday. On any holiday, any low-level holiday, Rosh Chodesh, Hanukkah, right? We don't say Tachanun because it has a level of a holiday, right? So we don't say it. And the commentators want to know, Tisha B'Av, of course you should say Tachanun. It's the saddest day of the year. Why don't we say Tachanun? And the answer is because Tisha B'Av is considered a Yom Tov. Because Tisha B'Av is considered a holiday. Right? The holiday, we don't say Good Yom Tov, right? Because as we're not supposed to make a greeting. We spoke about this, right? I think we spoke about it in the morning minute. Right? You're not supposed to say a greeting, but it's considered a Yom Tov. What? Tisha B'Av is considered a Yom Tov? Let's put that on the side. We'll get back to that. Right? How is Tisha B'Av? We're going to end with this concept. How is Tisha B'Av considered a Yom Tov? Right? What does that mean? So let's go into the Eicha for a minute. So, the Aleph Beis, right? The Aleph Beis is an unbelievable language, right? And it's not just letters. Now we know that there's meaning behind every letter. We just spoke about the inner part of the letters, the spelling out of it, the external part of the letter. But I want to tell you something unbelievable, something fascinating. In the Aleph Beis, the order of the Aleph Beis is, right? So Aleph Beis Gimel, right? And then you have Mem, right? Lam and Mem, right? And then you have Nun, you have Samach, you have Ayin, and then you have Pei. Right? The order of the letters, you have Ayin and then Pei. That's the order. In Eicha, starting from chapter 2, right? Yes, Rivka Kon, right? Mashiach will be born on Tisha B'Av. We're going to talk about that. Thank you. Very good. Excellent, Rivka. Right? So the order of the Eicha, Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, when he writes Eicha, he writes it in the order of the Aleph Beis. So if you open up, not that necessarily you have it right now, but next time you look through it, and in the Eicha, right? Chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, they go through the Aleph Beis. And it's fascinating. It's unbelievable that starting from chapter 2, not chapter 1, starting from chapter 2, right, he switches around the order. You have Pei before Ayin. You have Pei before Ayin, right? It's very weird. Starting again from chapter 2, right? You have Pei before Ayin. If you look at chapter 2, verse Tes Zayin, right? It says Pei Patsu Alecha. And then verse Yud Zayin, which is the next verse, Asu Hashem. Ayin is next. And the same thing in chapter 3. In chapter 3, he also goes in the Aleph Beis. He just has more verses with the same letter. And again, the same thing, right? Verse Mem Vav is Patsu Aleinu, right? Mem Zayin is also Pei. And then Mem Tes starts with Ayin. So the commentaries ask, what, Jeremiah forgot to order the Aleph Beis? God forbid. And he got to write the first chapter. Right? But then from then on, he forgot to order the Aleph Beis? So why did he change the order of the Aleph Beis? It's an unbelievable question. Unbelievable question. And I saw this beautiful idea. And in starting this idea that we want to home in on. And this is the nucleus for everything else that we're going to talk about. The letter Ayin and the letter Pei represent two parts of our body. And as the words are, Ayin, what's in Ayin? Ayin is eyes. And how do you say eyes? Ayin. Pei represents Peh. Peh is a mouth. So the Ayin and the Pei represents two parts of our body, the eyes and the mouth. So says the commentaries like this, that the Ayin comes before Pei because the right direction of doing things is seeing something, analyzing it, and then open up your mouth about what you see. Say the commentaries, but the destructions that happen, and we're going to go into them in a minute, right? The destructions that happened in the first temple, the second temple, the sin of the spies, as we mentioned, that's one of the 5 things that happened on Tisha B'Av. What was the cause? What was the root cause of all the problems were? that they opened up their mouth first, and then ayin, and then they looked based on what their mouth spoke. Now, mouth speaking not necessarily means it actually spoke, but it means to say the mouth, what it speaks, is what the brain thinks. And so the mouth spoke first. The spies spoke first of their plan to stay in the land of Israel. Why they want to stay there, it's not our discussion right now. We spoke about it in other classes, right? But they didn't want to go into the land of Israel for whatever reason. That's what their mouth spoke out. Then their eyes now saw everything as negative, not to be able to go into the land of Israel. And the same thing with the first destruction of the first temple, the second destruction, the second temple, right? And we're going to go into it in a minute. We're going to go into them in a minute. But that is the root of the problem of everything, is that the Aleph Beis was out of order. The Jewish people first had the peh, and then they had the ayin. And Yirmiyahu, to show this and to teach us this important lesson, he goes ahead and switches the order of the Aleph Beis and Eicha. Now, why not the first chapter? It's a good question. I don't have an answer for that right now. But the commentaries explain that Yirmiyahu, to show us this unbelievable concept, he went ahead and he switched the order of Eicha from the letters, and he made Pei Gam before Ayin, because that's what the root of the problem of the Jewish people, by the sin of the spies. And the commentaries say it even goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, by the sin of the Eitz Hadas, that they first had an assumption. They spoke before they actually looked at what happened. Right? They just said before actually looking at what happened, what the consequence of what happened. They first spoke. And this is something very important to think about and to reflect on. But we first have to see everything. We have to see all aspects. And sometimes we can't see everything, like we spoke about in this morning in the morning minute. That's why we cover our eyes when we say Shema. We can't see everything. We have to know, our eyes have to know that we can't see everything. And then open up your mouth. So let's go through the two destructions. What was the cause of the first one? What was the cause of the second one? Right? And then and see how this fits along this line, and what can we do to fix it, and the different kinos that speak about the different destructions. We're going to go into that, and then we will wrap it up with back to what we started off. Why is Tisha B'Av called a Yom Tov, right? And what's the significance? As Rivka pointed out, the Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av. So let's go to the first temple. So why was the first temple destroyed? Why was the first temple destroyed? So there's a fascinating thing, right? That the first temple, actually, the Jewish people had achdus, they had unity, right? To the extent that, as one of the kinos speaks out, it says with Jeremiah, right? Yirmiyahu with Mekana, he laments over the killing of Yeshayahu. Right, the killing of Yeshayahu, he was a Kohen Gadol, he was a prophet. Right before the destruction of the first temple, where he was going ahead and he was telling the Jewish people that you guys are going the wrong way. And what were they going the wrong way? They were doing the three cardinal sins: Avodah Zarah, Gila Arayis, and Shvichas Damim, idol worshiping, adultery, and killing. And he was telling them, you guys, you're going the wrong way. And they said, enough is enough. And they united together and they stoned him. And the kinos go through Jeremiah crying over his blood and going through the story of when the general came by, and I have to look up his name right now to remember it offhand, the Babylonian general, and he said, why is all this blood bubbling over here? The blood was bubbling. It was in the Temple Mount. He said, they said it's because of sacrifice. This, he tried. And then he started killing Kohanim, priests, little children. Finally, he said, Zechariah, the blood of Zechariah. Right, Zechariah, he said, Zechariah, how much more do you want me to kill to avenge your blood? And he stopped. The blood stopped. And it says that he was shaken to his core and he converted to Judaism. But we see the Jewish people were united together in the temple. They were doing this in the temple, united together, but doing all these three Averos. How's this possible? How's this possible? To answer this question, there's a contradiction. Because the Talmud says somewhere else that the reason why the first temple was destroyed because they did not make Birchas Torah, they did not make a blessing over the Torah before they learned. We have Birchas Torah, we say every morning. We also say when we get an Aliyah, and the Salonis Terasa gave us our Torah. But we say it every morning because we learn Torah every day. But they didn't make a bracha, they didn't make a blessing before they learned Torah. And that's why the temple was destroyed. And the commentary asks, that's a terrible thing. First of all, there's a contradiction. As we said, the famous explanation, and that's another passage in Talmud, because of the three cardinal sins. Number one, contradiction. Number two, okay, so they didn't make a blessing on the Torah. They probably did many other different things, but the three cardinal sins, that's why the temple was destroyed. And the commentaries explain that Torah is a tavlin. Torah is a medicine, is a potion. How is it that the Jewish people got to such a level that they did three cardinal sins with the Beis HaMikdash standing right there? We always say, well, if we had the Beis HaMikdash, we had prophets. We always say, if we had that, then we wouldn't sin, right? Look at us, we're in 2020, right? We're full of gadgets and physical things, and we don't have prophecy, we don't have any of this, and we don't have the great rabbis that they had in previous generations. So how could they do three cardinal sins? Three cardinal sins. So the commentaries explain is because when they learned Torah, yes, they learned Torah, and they had the Beis HaMikdash, but they used their mouth before they saw their eyes. Means to say they had an agenda. They didn't make a bracha on the Torah. They looked at it as just a knowledge. They looked at it as a rule book. It is, but it's not all it is. Why do we make a bracha, a blessing, before we learn Torah? Torah is spiritual by itself. When we make a blessing over food, we want to thank God. We make a blessing, right, on a mitzvah, we want to recognize that this is a Torah. Like, we're learning Torah, for God's sakes. Like, of course it's spiritual. Because you can miscue Torah as just a knowledge, or you can miscue it as just this is Jewish law. This is Jewish customs. This is what we do. No. Torah is an infusion of spirituality. We make a blessing over it. It's a connection to God. It changes the core of who we are. It elevates our neshama, our soul. That's what Torah is. And that's why we make a blessing before we learn Torah. For us to remember and to recognize that this is something spiritual, not just a knowledge. But since they didn't make a bracha tchila, they didn't make a blessing first, so therefore, they had their mouth before their eyes. They didn't see the real reality. They just learned it. They didn't want to really experience it. So it was just a knowledge. It was just laws. So they broke laws. People break laws. The Beis HaMikdash, it was a place they brought sacrifices, but it's just laws, customs. It didn't change them. It didn't make anything spiritual. And therefore, they could go ahead and do the three cardinal sins. So that was the first temple. And it's tremendous lessons to learn that we should never think that we are safe in our spirituality. We always have to constantly be learning, constantly growing in our spirituality. Right? And we have to make blessings of the Torah to realize that we need that infusion of spirituality. Not just the knowledge. Torah is not just the knowledge. It is. It's not just the knowledge. It's our lifeline. And therefore, there's no contradiction. Of course, it's because of three cardinal sins. But how did they get to that? It's because they didn't make a blessing of the Torah first. So that's the first temple. And that was the keynote of Jeremiah crying over Zechariah, where they went ahead and they killed a prophet in the Beis HaMikdash. They went to such an extent. And some other keynotes on that. That's what I wanted to mention. The second temple, why was the second temple destroyed? So we're all familiar with this, because of baseless hatred, because of sinas chinam, of people not getting along. The famous story of Kamsa bar Kamsa, right? This wealthy man, right, made a party and he invited his friend Kamsa. His messenger got the information wrong. He invited his friend Bar Kamsa. He invited his enemy Bar Kamsa. I'm not going to go through the whole story right now, Right? But basically he came, he said, oh, okay, then maybe he's reaching out. He wants to be friends. He came to the party and the guy said, no way, you can't come in here. And he said, I'll pay for my own food. No, I don't want you here. Get out. I'll pay for half the party food. No, I don't want. I'll pay for the whole. No. And he kicked him out. And he then went ahead to the Romans and he said, the Jews are rebelling against you. He said, I'll prove it to you. And he went ahead and he brought a calf, right, as a korban, a sacrifice. And he made a little slit over its eyes. Now, that's considered a blemish and it can be brought. The rabbis weren't sure what to do because they knew it's from the Romans, maybe a one-time thing. And they decided not to do it. And I don't want to get sidetracked. But based on hatred, and that was just one story, we see the guy couldn't stand the person being in his house. And then that drove him to go and tattle on the Jews and the Romans. But they said that was a disease that was happening. They couldn't get along with each other. They had Torah. They had many things, and they had all that good stuff, and they did it for the right reasons, and they blessed the Torah first. But the second temple was because they couldn't get along with each other. What was the root of that? What's the root of not getting along with each other? So we spoke about many ideas in the morning minutes, but along the lines of what we're saying now, if you first speak, you have an agenda, then you're never going to get along with someone that you don't like because you have your agenda. You're going to judge the person. Judging someone. Right? It says, do not judge someone until you reach this place. Commentary says, and you can never reach someone's place because you don't know everything that's going on in someone else. You don't know what their thoughts are. You don't know their struggles. You don't know their difficulties. You can never judge someone. But we do it all the time. Why do we judge people? Because we have an agenda already. We have a preconceived notion. We don't look with our eyes and see everything that's going on. Or, as we said, we don't know everything that's going on. Realize we don't know everything that's going on. And therefore, there's hatred. Therefore, there's hatred might be a little hard, there is, but there's disagreements and heated disagreements. Not in a healthy way, but in a negative way. People don't want to talk to each other. People get upset at each other. Because they just have an agenda. They speak before they see all the details. And if we looked at all the details and realized we might not understand what everybody thinks, or even if sometimes we do, we see that they don't mean to be hurtful. This is what they believe. And there's nothing wrong with disagreements. The Talmud's full of disagreements. But you'll see that they're not trying to come out against you. And both sides will see that. If they open up their eyes, most people are not looking to hurt someone else. But when you think that they are, then you're going to attack them. So if we don't use our mouth first, but we actually look and we stop judging people, we try to look at the whole situation, that's how to avoid judging people, then we will overcome baseless hatred. We'll overcome the urge to hurt someone else and to judge them and then to create fights. Now, there's a beautiful story in the Kinos where in the Second Temple, it talks about the children of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. That's one of them. And then there's another one, I think it's in the same Kinos, right, of the children that are on the boats. It's a heart-wrenching Kinos. Of the tragedy and the persecution that was going on during that time. But I think there's a tremendous lesson from those kinos where it goes into details of the children looking and saying, we don't want to be sold into slavery. We'll rather give up our lives. And they jumped into the ocean, to the river, right? Before they were going to be sold into slavery and be made to do actions that are not proper. And then the story of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol and his two children who were beautiful and they were sold into slavery. They didn't have the chance to jump over. They were sold into slavery and they're sold to two different owners who were neighbors. And they were talking to each other and said, look, we have the most beautiful children. Let's make slaves. We'll have the most gorgeous slaves. We'll be able to profit. They put them in the same room. And it goes into details how each one was talking to themselves and telling themselves, how could I do this sin with a non-Jew, or with a slave, with someone that's not from my heritage, from who I am. And the girl was saying she's the daughter of Miriam, and she's the daughter of a Kohen, and the son was saying, I'm the son of Aaron. And again, I'm not going to go through the whole kinos. And then it says, until there was a little light, and they looked at each other and they realized they were brothers and sisters. And they cried on each other's souls until their souls departed them. But what was these kids' power? How many of us would be able to survive that? You know the consequences if we don't do, we throw ourselves into the river. It's because they used their eyes. They looked at the greater picture. They realized that right now their lives are gonna. It's a minute thing for a world of eternity, of this next world. They realized that the children realized that they can't do an action like this, and then it would have been even worse. Brothers and sisters, even worse one. But they looked at their eyes. They realized. They looked at the situation. They cannot be involved in the situation. They just react with their mouth, like our mouth just reacts. Just speaks, not even thinking. Right? That's a phrase. Talking without thinking. They analyzed the situation. They looked at it. They viewed all the things, and that gave them the energy to act properly. So they had their iron before the pay. And that's, I believe, one of the depths of the kinos, based on this explanation of Yirmiyahu, why he changed the letters. And it's a kinot written by Yirmiyahu. Written by him, one of the old ones. Based off Yirmiyahu, crying over the children. Is that these children, we have to learn from them. We read through the kinos, learn from them that we have to look at the situation and look at our lives. And say, hey, what are we doing? Are we just reacting to what's happening in front of us? Are we reacting to someone else without looking at the whole situation? Are we reacting to the physical world and giving up on the world to come? I'm talking to myself. Or should we stop reacting and just blurting out and actually use our eyes, and look at the whole situation? And say, hey, what's the right course of action over here? How do we make sure not to judge the other person? How do we make sure that we avoid fights? How do we make sure that we avoid doing things that might turn us away from our Father in heaven? The iron comes before the pay. And there's many other heart-wrenching kinos. And if you look throughout history, when we lost track, the expulsion of Spain that happened on Tisha B'Av, the burning of the Talmud that happened on Tisha B'Av. These are some of the kinos that are spoken about. Why was there the decree of the burning of the Talmud, and not only the Talmud but other holy books in France? It's before the printing press. So some say it's because those, and again, who am I, little person, to say anything? But there was a group of people that burnt the Rambam's writings, and it's a punishment. But there was a reaction before looking at everything that was written and realizing there's other ways different than your way that are still within Torah guidelines. And so many other catastrophes throughout history. There's a list of them. And if you look at the source, you look at the Jewish people at that time, and we have to reflect internally in ourselves that so many times the Jewish people were reacting first before looking at the whole situation, be it if it's between brethren, between their Father in heaven, moving themselves away from their core purpose in life. First temple, ben Adam l'makom, between man and God. Second temple, between Adam l'chaverim, between man and his fellow. Those are the two temples, two different core values of the Jewish people that we have to work together with, between man and God and between man and his fellow. So this leads to our conclusion. So why is Tisha B'Av a day of Simcha? No, that's the wrong word. It's not a day of Simcha. It's a day of mourning. But why is Tisha B'Av a Yom Tov, a holiday? And as Rivka said, Mashiach, it says Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av, whatever that means. You know, my kids, when they're young, they said, Daddy, are you Mashiach? Right? I said, I wasn't born on Tisha B'Av. Right? But Mashiach's born on Tisha B'Av. What's the meaning behind that? What's the depth behind that? So the answer, my friends, is back to what we spoke about, Arbaim Yom, 40 days, and 22, Arbaim Kinus 40, and the 22. Because if we work on this 22, if we serve, we do this as avoda, we realize it's a service, and we are able to use this day as a transition of recognizing that we have to use our eyes before we use our peh, before we use our mouth. Then we could switch the morning into a simcha, into a day of simcha. It will switch into a Yom Tov because it utilizes its purpose, like we spoke about 2 weeks ago. The purpose of mourning is that we get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and we build the temple. There's a reason why we mourn. We don't just mourn over cry. We don't just cry over spilled milk. That happened thousands of years ago. Move on with your life. Move on with your life. And in certain, in certain things we say that. As I mentioned many times, I've had a broken engagement. Right? I'm past that. Right? Baruch Hashem. I'm married with kids many years, and even before I got married, before I met Devorah, I was past it. I was moving on. And I've spoken to people that have had it. I said, move on. You lost your job. It hurts in the beginning. You deal with it. You need some help, you get some help, and then you move on and look forward. So why are we still crying over the temple? Move on, Jews. Come on. The answer is because by crying, as we mentioned, it is moving on. It's a way of transforming ourselves and recognizing that we're getting closer to Hashem because, as we said, the temple, the Beis HaMikdash, and is not just the Beis HaMikdash. It's a relationship with Hashem that we're lacking. And that's what Yom Tov is about. Yom Tov is a day of recognizing and building our relationship with Hashem. If it's Pesach, recognizing Cherus, freedom. If it's Shavuos, recognizing Kabbalah, the Torah, receiving the Torah. And if it's Sukkot, recognizing our Manei Kavod, clouds of glory, recognizing that God is taking care of us at all times. Or Purim, realizing that God's in the hidden and Chanukah, God's in the open. Tisha B'Av is realizing that we are foreign from God. All year we can't live like that. We do things, as we mentioned. But we can't live like that. But Tisha B'Av and the 3 weeks are a time that we realize that we're foreign from God. We're in exile. And if we work on that, it's avoda, it's a service. It's something to work on. So then we could change the whole thing. And yes, then we'll say we are by Shlishi, the third temple, the exile is over, then we say we're over that. Now we accomplished what we needed to accomplish, and now it's a Yom Tov. It's a Yom Tov now, but then we can be happy for that Yom Tov. Because a Yom Tov means to say a day that we work on. And what's the epitome? The Mashiach to come. That's how we overcome. That's how we know that we transition into the next stage of this Yom Tov, is when Mashiach comes. So therefore, Mashiach is born on this day. Because he's born on the day that his purpose is to change. His purpose is to change, that we, yes, get over because we accomplished what we needed to do, and then transition into the days of Mashiach, the days of that we recognize that God's presence is around us. We're not foreign from God anymore. And that's why it's called the Yom Tov. So my friends, that's the avoda, that's the service of Tisha B'Av. So when we read the Kinos, let's reflect a little bit and say, hey, we are in exile. Hey, are we using our peh before our eyes? Are we using our ayins before our peh the way we're supposed to? And realize that there's two things that we have to fix, ben adam le'makom ben adam le'chaveiro, between man and God and man and his fellow. And that's the two temples that were destroyed. And when we read through the different kinos, realize that this is not something that just happened 2,500 years ago or 3,000 years ago, right? This is something that happened throughout history, and constantly because of our removing from God, we have all these difficulties because we haven't yet We haven't yet transformed ourselves from the ayin, from the pay to the ayin, to completely the ayin to the pay. We haven't fixed it yet. But when we do, then this Yom Tov will be a happy day again. Because it is a Yom Tov, because it's a avoda, it's a service. That's what Yom Tov is. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Wishing everybody a nechama on Tisha B'Av, an easy fast, but more importantly, a meaningful fast. Because as the Rambam says, the reason why we fast on Tisha B'Av, or any fast, he speaks about any fast. He says the reason why we fast is to make us realize that our day is slightly different than normal, to make us reflect on the day. It's not necessarily the fasting itself, but it's to awaken us and to make us realize that today's a little different. And therefore we have many more things in Tisha B'Av to remind us that. The sitting on the floor we spoke about last week, not wearing leather, and others, to make us realize that today's a day that we have to reflect. That's the avodah of the day. So let us think about that. Let's reflect about that. And God willing, right, if we do the avodah correctly, this Tisha B'Av, right, and we recognize the Yom Tov component of it, and realize that this is avodah, it's a service, that God willing, this Tisha B'Av will turn into a simcha, and Mashiach will come speedily in our days. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.